What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a combat basics guide for Expeditions Rome. If you're having trouble and are trying to understand a few things, I'm actually going to link another video in the description talking about how to get better at turn-based RPGs in general, if you're just having trouble with the systems at play in a turn-based game, period. But beyond that, we're of course covering things specific to Expedition Rome. Now, Expeditions Rome uses a team turn-based combat system. This means that your team will take its turn all at once, and then the enemy team will take all of their turns at once, and then the friendlies, which is all the NPCs that are on your side but you're not controlling, will take their turns. And then finally there's the neutral turn, which is typically just like civilians and things that are on the board primarily to be pathed around. Because the second thing I'd like to mention here is that your characters can move through each other in terms of their hexes, because we are using a hex-based battle grid, which you should be able to see here. But while your friendly characters will be able to move through each other, what you can't do is move past enemies or through them, or neutral characters. Now, friendly targets, you can move through their hex, but you can't, of course, occupy the same hex. Beyond that, each turn consists of an action and movement. Now, your action will typically also let you move as well. Whenever you have a character selected, all of the green dots are where your character can move and still make their attack. However, they will still have movement points left. Any hex that has a yellow dot means that your character will expend their action point getting to that particular area. Now, this won't expend all of their movement points. You can move so many hexes per round, but moving to a yellow hex will expend your action point. Now, those are the bare bones basics, as you might imagine. But beyond that, we're going to be occupying the battlefield with 4 distinct classes in this game. Now, I'll probably do a separate video deep diving the individual classes, but I wanted to start here first. But essentially, the 4 classes in this game are Melee Warrior, Assassin, Support Warrior, which is like a pikeman, two-handed lancer, if you will, and then finally an Archer. Now, each of these classes plays a bit of a different role in combat, and I'm going to explain the basics of each one to you. That is, things that are unique and important to them. But something to keep in mind here, while you will be choosing the class of your main character, of course, you are going to get a companion that represents every one of these. There are actually missions that you can't take your main character or your companions on. These are typically to pacify conquered regions, and you'll get these special missions where you have to send one companion and a team of hired Praetorians on, which are effectively mercenaries. Now, I mean that in the sense that you will be hiring these characters from your base camp to serve as party members, and that hiring mercenaries is a common tactical and CRPG thing to do. Praetorians themselves are not literally mercenaries, and because this game is fairly real-worldish, I feel I should probably make that distinction. But my point is, regardless of what class your main character is, you will be playing around with all of the classes all the time, so it's important to understand what each of them does. Now, at the start of combat, you enter what is called the preparation phase. This is going to let you slightly move around your characters before the beginning of a battle. This is important, but you don't get to move as much as you might like to start the battle, so don't overthink it, basically. For the most part, you want to position your archers, put your melee guys up front, pretty straightforward stuff. But everywhere in the light blue is where you can potentially move one of your characters to start the fight. Furthermore, while we get into this, every single class has weapon and equipped skills that they need to understand. So weapon skills are skills granted to you by your actual weapon. The weapon skills are on the left side of your hotbar, and they are colored purple. Now, equipped skills will be a different color based on your class. However, equipped skills are skills that you have gotten and can actively use that are from your class specifically. And then to the right, we have our tactical items. Furthermore, those little red squares you see at the bottom of each of the individual skill is the number of charges it has. Some weapon skills and equipped skills can only be used so many times per combat encounter, and that's those charges down below. Now, some classes actually have the ability to potentially recharge some of their expended charges. Also, while some weapons will actually grant you more than 3 weapon abilities, you can only have 3 weapon abilities equipped at any time, and 6 equipped abilities at any given time from your actual class. And if you go into the character menu, you can actually choose between which ones you have available to you in combat. And then to the right, we have our tactical items. These are basically your consumables that each character has access to. These are equipped from the equipment screen, and you'll find a variety as you play through the game. Each of these also has charges, and you actually have to refresh these at your main Legion outpost from your war table. You'll actually have to pay a little bit of money to recharge these once they're expended, provided you want to keep using them, of course. But you'll get things like bandages, water jugs. Water jugs are important to put out people who are on fire. You can throw torches in this game, which will set people on fire. You can get caltrops, of course, which will usually cover an area around a character, and then if they step on it, they become crippled and bleeding. Tactical items are actually very good, and while obviously the main draw is your class skills and weapon skills, don't forget about tactical items. They're very strong. Furthermore, to the far left, we can actually see our currently equipped weapon. Each character gets 2 weapon sets. Now, even if your second weapon set is unfilled, you will then be unarmed, which has its own appropriate weapon skills. One of which, for the unarmed, is actually aid. Aid is important because if a character drops below 0 hit points, but less than 50% of their total hit point as a negative, then they will just go in a downed state and start bleeding out. At which point you have to use bandages, or use the unarmed aid skill to stabilize them so they don't die. One of the classes actually has a revive ability that can bring up incapacitated characters, provided they haven't actually died. Now that's the primary basics, so from there, let's talk about some of the individual class things. Now, archers pretty much do what you would expect. They are archers. However, I do want to call attention to their interrupt abilities, which is to say archers have an ability literally called interrupt that will function as an ambush. If an enemy walks into their big line of sight, then your archer takes a reactive shot at them during the enemy's turn. And interrupt is actually a 150% damage from your regular bow. And if you upgrade interrupt, you can actually take 2 shots, meaning that oftentimes it is better and does more damage for you to use the interrupt ability for your archer and try to lure enemies to them. But beyond that, again, we will be doing more deep dive class stuff probably in the next video. But for right now, I'm just trying to give a basic overview of each of the classes and some of the more unique things for them. And then we have the Triarius, I guess. It's like a lancer. These people will use either a 2-handed staff or a lance or a pike. And that's important because their weapon skills will typically see them attacking from a few hexes away from their actual target, which is a requirement. Some of their weapon abilities will let them hit enemies that are right next to them, but a lot of them require a range of 2 to 3 hexes away from the target, which is something you need to keep an eye on. And beyond that, your pikemen here are actually the support class of the game, meaning that a lot of their class skills revolve around buffing the entire party with either extra movement or extra damage. They can restore action points if you pick up Inspire. They also have an ability called Rouse, which forces enemies out of the way, which again is important for controlling the battlefield because you cannot move through enemies. And then we have our melee warriors. They are pretty straight up. They're just swordsmen. Now, you can choose to dual wield with these guys or go sword and shield. And if you wanted to, you could pick up one of the 2-handed weapons as well. But the melee warriors primarily move a lot with sword and shield, or one-handed and shield in mind, as a lot of their abilities focus on them actually having a shield in hand. So for these characters, that blue bar right above their health bar is their shield bar. This is how much damage their shield will deflect. Their shield will actually deflect arrows pretty much just across the board. However, melee characters can, of course, attack their shield, which will then lower that to 0. Now, your shield can actually regenerate shield points, but each time your shield takes damage, your melee warrior, or whoever has the shield, will lose a point of what is called Strong. Strong is a buff that, per stack of Strong, you refresh 25% of your shield every turn. Meaning that if you get hit multiple times, you're going to lose all of your strong, and then your shield won't regenerate. That is called being shield broken, which means your shield isn't going to regenerate on its own. Melee warriors do have a lot of skills that revolve around keeping their shield up, but it is unlikely to last you an entire battle, and you will have to chew through enemy shields to get to them. There are a couple of abilities that actually pierce through shields, and status effects for starters, and primarily status effects will also ignore the shield entirely, because if you set someone on fire, obviously the shield's not going to do much there. Now the other thing to keep in mind are those little yellow blips to the right of the health bar. Now this is primarily for your melee warrior types, though technically anybody wearing armor will have these, and that is how many points of damage your character will mitigate by having their armor on. However, armor can of course be destroyed. This is where our pikemen come in. A lot of their abilities also have what is called armor shred, which will permanently get rid of those blips for the rest of the battle. And then last but not least, we have our assassin types. These guys, of course, specialize in single target damage. They get a lot of abilities that help them move around the battlefield, avoid attacks of opportunity, which I'll get to in just a minute. They can occasionally make attacks that don't actually cost them action points, which is incredibly helpful. And overall, they just specialize in dealing damage to one particular character. These guys can be very helpful for chewing through shields, as they get typically multiple attacks per turn, because one characteristic that is especially annoying about shields is that doing more damage to a shield than the shield has shield points doesn't overflow into the enemy's health pool. For instance, if you have a shield that has 5 shield points, but you deal 8 damage, you don't do 3 more damage to the enemy's health, you just hit the shield. So having a character that can perform multiple attacks per round can really help you get through shields and actually kill the target, which is where these guys come in. Now, for the last part of this video, I just want to talk about a few other things, and those are primarily attack of opportunity and the morale system. So attacks of opportunity are basically when your character is right next to an enemy or an enemy is right next to you, and one of you tries to move. This triggers an attack of opportunity. This is the primary way this is going to happen. However, there are a lot of skills that can provoke attacks of opportunity. For instance, if someone is right next to your archer, that archer just attacking will provoke an attack of opportunity on the archer. Some of the medical skills will actually provoke attacks of opportunity if performed right next to an enemy. However, that is a thing that cuts both ways, and you can take advantage of attacks of opportunity to really deal some damage to your enemy by surrounding them and just navigating the battlefield, basically. Another thing to keep in mind, the Princeps, which is like the melee warrior class, actually does get extra points, so to speak, to their attacks of opportunity, meaning that attacks of opportunity from a specific build from that class can actually stun opponents when you hit them with attacks of opportunity, which means they lose their next turn. The other big thing I want to talk about is the morale system, and then we're going to wrap up on a little bit of status effects. So the morale system is, as you might imagine, a character's morale, but a low morale will cause them to fail morale checks, at which point they will panic. Panic characters lose their turn. There are a variety of ways to affect the enemy's morale, primarily through the pikeman support class. A lot of their abilities will cause enemies to suffer morale damage, or negative morale, when you kill enemies with that class, as well as the assassin has some abilities as well that will also do this. And the more enemies you kill, the lower the morale for your enemy gets. However, this also cuts both ways. It is possible for an enemy to lower your character's morale until you're running away in a panic. So morale is something you do have to watch. And if you use skills that specifically work around morale, you can cause your opponent a lot of problems. And then, like I said, let's wrap up on status effects. So there are quite a few status effects. The most important ones are probably bleeding, burning, and poisoned. For starters, all of these are going to damage you through your shield. They can be healed, preferably by the medic skill from the support class pikemen. They have a skill tree called medic, which will have the medic skill, which can then, of course, heal these conditions. Bandages will also heal bleeding, but each turn that your character has one of these effects, there is a small chance they can shake it off, but I wouldn't count on that. These effects can last a very long time. So if you have a character that's burning, you might want to have a water jug on hand to throw on them to put out the fire. Whereas throwing a torch at a character will set them on fire, and they will likely burn to death from it. Fire is especially dangerous because it will of course do burning damage to you every turn, but it will also lower your max health. That can only be offset in combat by the medic skill from the pikeman class. Otherwise, that character's max health is just permanently lowered for that entire fight, which can cause you a lot of problems. Now, in addition to these status effects existing, of course, enemies will often use throwables that will either set areas on fire or unleash a poison cloud, and walking through them will apply the appropriate status effect. And like I mentioned, bleeding, poison, and burning are definitely the ones to watch out for the most, though there are others like crippled that will lower the amount you can move but won't stop you from moving entirely. So just some things to watch out for. But there you go, guys. There is a basic overview of the combat for Expeditions Rome. In my next video, we will again likely be covering a more deep dive look at the actual classes themselves and what some of them can do for you, and some strategies I've found myself using. But that said, I hope you guys found the video informational. If you did, by all means, let me know in the comment section down below. Thank you so much for watching. May you wander in wisdom, and have an amazing day.